Good evening and welcome to another episode of Territory Talks. I am your co-host, Shaina Smith-Archer, saying greetings from the Virgin Islands. With me tonight, my other co-host, Thomas Famous, and we have apologies from Eden Hurlston in Cayman. He's out for a good cause today. We're rooting for his son's Little League baseball team, I think it is. So hopefully he has good news for us when we're back again. So Chris, over to you.
Good evening and welcome to another episode of Territories Talk. Our apologies for last week. We had technical difficulties beyond our control, but we're back this week to ensure that we inform and unite our overseas territories family. So tonight we have a very special lineup for you. We have Mr. EDDIE Tingling-MILLER of the Cayman Islands Red Cross, who's going to give us a presentation on hurricane preparedness. Hello, EDDIE.
Hello, good evening. Good evening. Good to be here.
Also from the Cayman Islands, we have a double dose of Cayman Islands. We have Miss Wendy from Cayman News Service. How are you doing, Miss Wendy?
I'm doing great. And let me tell you, it's always worth having a double dose of the Cayman Islands.
Okay, mate. Okay. And last but not least, we have Mr. Grant, Mr. Ron A. Grant from 284 Media of the beautiful Virgin Islands.
Don't you forget.
Good night, Mr. Grant. How are you?
Good evening, everybody. Pleasure to be here.
So, first up, we're going to have 15 to 20 minutes of our presentation we're going to have our little news clips, and then we'll have 15 to 20 minutes presentation from Mr. EDDIE about hurricane preparedness, because no matter which island you are in, whether it's big, small, even if you're a landmass in Central America or the Americas, hurricanes can reach you, and it's best to be prepared. And
All right,
just a word.
Go ahead.
Pardon?
No, go ahead.
Yes, and we want to thank our media partners, regional media partners, ZJB Radio in Montserrat, CBN Radio in the Virgin Islands, PJFE in Saba, Channel 82 in Bermuda, Cayman Marl in the Cayman Islands, Radio Turks and Caicos in Turks and Caicos Island, and our newest media partner, CBC Caribbean Broadcast Corporation of Barbados. So as you can see, we are expanding, and we are grateful for our media partners for running our shows. Some will run it live and some will run the replay in subsequent days. But either way, we are now able to reach out to many different islands. So thank you to our media partners.
Yes. All right, Chris. So which corner of the Caribbean are you going to start with?
Sorry, say it again.
Which corner of the Caribbean do you want to start the newsreel with?
We could whichever reel you pick first.
All right. So I think this was the big news. Let's start here.
Yes. Honorable Mia Motley made the Time magazine 100 most influential persons of 2022. This is a major achievement, not just for the Caribbean, but for women in general, because as we know, we are a stage now where women are being recognized for their true worth. And if there's any Caribbean woman that has projected leadership beyond just partisanship, is the Honorable Mia Motley.
Yes. Yes, it was a proud day for Caribbean women. I agree. All right, next up.
Yes, a few weeks ago, the Prime Minister of St. Kitts, the Honorable Dr. Timothy Harris, let's just say, took proactive measures, and he dissolved Parliament. So we'll get into that later on with Mr. Grant.
Mm-hmm.
And in our sister island of Anguilla last week, a young lady won a by-election. She won it convincingly in it's called Valley North, or the District 3, Miss Rogers Webster. She got a total of 397 votes, I want to say, and the other two persons got less than 200 votes. So once again, women are showing their worth.
All right, let's touch on some BVI news.
I'll let you do that, Shaina.
Well, it was a proud day in the Virgin Islands. We were all glued to Sports Max, watching history being made in Jamaica, as our very own Miss Adeja Hodge took home top honors at the Carifta Games for 2022. So we actually just had the recognition for the entire team last week, where she was able to fly home because, as most persons may not be aware, she's still a high school student. So after Carifta, she had to go back to school. So they're on break now. So she came home last week, and the other members of the team, they all were there, and they also recognized. So I think for me, as a past athlete myself, I ran track in high school. You know, it's amazing to see how far we've come. And I think that's one of the things where we also will talk on, I guess, maybe another show, actually, in terms of development of sports across the region and the opportunities that it offers for young people to, whether it's through a career as a professional athlete, or, you know, just furthering their studies as an opportunity to get through college. So we want to say congratulations to the entire BVI Carifta team and the entire athletic fraternity, I would say, because, you know, it's the parents, it's the BVI Athletic Association, the coaches, the track clubs, it's everybody that has played a part in, you know, all of their successes that they were able to accomplish. So it was really, really great to see. It was a shining moment for us.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and what was special was that BVI is one of the smallest populations in the Caribbean, with only 30,000 persons. And for the BVI teams to rank second or third, Mr. Grant?
They were in the top, they were in the top 3.
Mm-hmm.
To rank third amongst all those islands that are having populations of millions or hundreds of thousands really meant a lot for us.
We didn't hear what you were saying, Ron. Go ahead.
The thing, Adeja herself was essentially one of the top athletes, and she received high recognition from across the region for her performance.
Yes. All right, and touching on Grenada. Go ahead, Chris.
Yes, snap election code in Grenada that Mr. Ron and I will be discussing later on.
All right. All right, so those are all the highlights that we have right now. Okay. All right, Chris, so we're gonna change up segments now and move on to hurricane preparedness. For those who may have just moved to the Caribbean last night, you know, today is the first of the first day of what we call hurricane season. You know, in the Caribbean, we always have a season for everything: mangoes, sugar apple, and we have a season for hurricanes. So we decided that, you know, we can never hear enough about preparedness. I often quote a saying that we grew up hearing, you know, an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. So we want to make sure, again, that if you just moved last week and you have no idea what hurricanes are, and, you know, may have only heard about it in passing, we have Eddie here to share with us some tips in terms of us getting ready and staying ready for hurricane season, because its season is all the way until November 30th. I only wish mango season lasted that long, Ron. That would be so awesome.
Indeed.
All right, Eddie. So you're up next. I will also bring up your slides, and you just let me know how you would like to advance.
Okay, good afternoon. Slide there.
Wait, hold 1 second. Let me
Thanks very much.
get us sorted out. Here we go. Okay. So let's start at the top.
There we are. That's it. Thank you very much. Well, it's an absolute pleasure to be here today. Really appreciate the opportunity to come and give you guys all around the Caribbean region some advice and some tips on the 2022 Atlantic hurricane season. For those who don't know, my name is Eddie Miller. I'm the disaster manager at the Cayman Islands Red Cross, and mainly specialising in disaster preparedness and response. As we know, and it's a very good point, all the islands are made up of different people all around the world. So as we know, people come to the island, especially Cayman is very transient. You know, they don't know what a hurricane is. They don't know where the local shelters are, and they don't know what items to prepare for, etc., etc. So as of today, we're going to be going through a few things, talking about the season in general, and just be going over those preparedness tips and ideas, so you get some sort of idea of how to better prepare yourself and your families. I think we've lost the slides on the screen.
No, we're ready to go once you're ready to go.
Oh, okay. Apologies. Okay, good stuff. Good stuff. I was going mad then. Anyway, so let's just get into it. We're trying to make this as simplistic as we possibly can, because, you know, as of today, I was doing the media blitz in Cayman, and sometimes, you know, depending who's doing the presentations, it can get a bit scientific and a bit in depth, and sometimes that can go over people's heads. So we're just trying to make it as basic and obviously an easy playing field and format for people to understand. So we're normally in Cayman, we're going by the Colorado State University, CSU, or the National Hurricane Center, which is the sibling of NOAA based in Miami, Florida. And CSU normally release their predictions for the season sort of beginning of April, late May, just before hurricane season starts on June the 1st. So for those who don't know, this year, CSU is predicting 19 named storms, 9 of those potentially to be hurricanes, and 4 of those to be major hurricanes. So when we're talking about major hurricanes, we're talking about category 3 and up, 4 and 5. Now, the National Hurricane Center has said, correlation to this, there could be 14 to 21 named storms, 6 to 10 hurricanes, and 3 to 6 major hurricanes. So obviously, as we know, we've got an above average season predicted, and this is following trend over the last few years. There's not going to be any rest per se in the numbers decreasing. As we know, we had a couple of years ago, we had a record breaking year where I think they predicted 16 to 17 named storms, and we had over 30. So they were a little bit off there. But all the same, we shouldn't be complacent, and we need to prepare ourselves. So the reason why we've got a predicted above season, I won't go into too much scientific detail, but it's basically due to climate change in some sub-degrees, warmer than normal sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic, and the cool waters in the Pacific, and then due to the absence of El Nino and La Nina conditions. And also we're talking about the weaker trade winds, starting more tropical cyclones, depressions, and formations. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you very much. So again, like we were saying earlier, people may have lived in the Caribbean all their lives. You know, some people have only been there 10 minutes. And again, we have to drill home every year as part of education in school when you're growing up. Everyone knows the basic things that you need to have in terms of preparing for a hurricane. But I know it's hurricane season. We shouldn't let it slide that other things could happen in the event. So, for example, regionally, we have volcanoes, we have earthquakes, tsunamis, God forbid. Cayman suffered some serious landfill fires over the last couple of years. So these are sort of items that you should have anyway, whether there's a hurricane or not. And I know we're talking about 6 months of the year. I would just treat it every month of the year have these things in your possession or in your home if you can. So when we're talking about sort of essential items of personal preparedness, we want everyone to have a gallon of water to have per person per day. Try and have a minimum of 3 gallons to last us 3 days, but we'd recommend that you have more. If it's a state where you're having water delivered to your home, maybe during the hurricane season, just add an additional water bottle to your order or delivery. That's how we would look at it. Stocking up on your non-perishable food items, in this case, canned goods, whether it's tuna, sardines or whatever. I've seen some tinned cheeseburgers now you can buy in certain supermarkets. So it's come a long way since the good old days of eating out tuna out of a tin. But as we know, the shelf life on these things is quite significant compared to sort of dairy products and those sorts of things. Flashlight is essential with some spare batteries. I see a lot now in some department stores, and I know in other parts of the Caribbean you can actually get the wind-up radios now as well, which have flashlights built into them. They're very, very useful in the absence of lack of batteries. And to have a good first aid kit. Obviously, if you're out in your vehicle going to work, it's good to have an emergency go bag in your vehicle if you can, or your workplace. But it's a good idea to have a first aid kit in your home because you never know when you may not be able to access medical facilities in the event of a hurricane. Prescription drugs. This is a big thing as well, not just with hurricane season, but with the COVID pandemic. As we know, there's been a limited supply chain issues that have been reduced. So we're advising everyone, if you do take prescription drugs, don't leave it to the last minute. Make sure you go to your pharmacist or your local medical vendor and try and get at least 1 month's supply, if not 2 or 3 months, if they're willing to give them to you. Storage of documents, I'd recommend getting sort of a watertight sealed bag or box for your home in the event that you're low-lying and you're in a flood-lying area. And also just to house in there important documents. You may have to leave the islands. People will want to see your passports. And as we know, COVID vaccination, proof of that, that's another thing that some countries may want to see in the event you have to leave your mother country. Cash, good case to have a couple of $1,000s on hand if you have that amount, but even a few bucks. Obviously, as we know, ATMs, lack of power, you're not going to be able to go to your local First Caribbean branch and withdraw your money. Make sure you have some cash in your home. And it's a good idea to have some basic tools as well, whether it's a mini saw, a little pocket knife, screwdriver for those basic home repairs if you need to. And another essential item, which is always there, is personal protective equipment, or PPE, as we abbreviate it. And as we know, this is second nature to us now with the COVID pandemic, monkeypox in some parts of the world. Make sure you've got your masks, gloves, hand sanitizer, because as we know, if you do have to go to an emergency shelter, these are some of the policies still in place for entering these shelters. So that's a basic touch on essential personal items. Next slide. Thank you very much. And if you're at home in the event of a storm and you don't want to go to an emergency shelter, when we're talking about emergency shelters, we know some jurisdictions or territories have more of these than some others. They really are a last resort for yourself and your family to go to. It's not an expectation. In Cayman, we have a capacity for 8% of the population, and we're really looking at the most vulnerable members of the community to go to these shelters. If it's a case where you are fortunate to go to a friend or neighbour's home and they've got hurricane-rated windows or hurricane-rated facility, we recommend that you would go there before going to a shelter. But all the same, have a good family disaster plan in place. You have no idea how many people don't know the local emergency numbers. I've had people come to Cayman thinking it's 999, as it is in the UK, when in fact it's 911, and they've been caught off guard there. Make sure you practice your plan with your kids. If you've got elderly parents or you've got grandparents, work numbers, make sure that your kids or family members know who to contact. Okay. In the event that you're fortunate to have hurricane shutters on your home, make sure that they can move easily. As we know over the years, testament to it is that they rust, depending on which ones. They haven't closed them for several years. A week before a hurricane comes, they find it difficult to close them. So good practice to make sure you're opening and closing those, and make sure the locks work if they have locks. Talking about cutting back foliage and big trees. If your garden's got a big ackee tree or it's got a big avocado tree, make sure you're cutting back those branches, because we don't want those things flying through the air. God forbid, there's a lightning storm or a big hurricane and that tree is going to fall onto your property or someone else's, in that fact. Same with removing heavy equipment, vases, flower pots from your gardens. Another big thing that gets overlooked all the time is if you're a pet owner, some people have 3 or 4 dogs or cats and they take for granted that, they're going to be okay. You need to make sure you get ample food supplies. And again, a lot of animals need medication, just like humans, okay? Are you going to be able to get these things last minute? Make sure you have ample things for your pets. Unplug small devices and appliances in case there's any sort of power surges or flooding coming into your home. Safety shields are a good idea if you can get them, plastic safety shields to put into your appliance or plug sockets. And again, if for the unfortunate event you do have water coming into your home, your workplace, do not use any electrical outputs until a professional is checked to make sure that it is deemed safe to do so. Next slide, please. Okay. And just to kind of wrap it up, just in the interest of time, obviously, when we're talking about the community, okay, people are moving to an area. They may not be familiar with where they're living. They may not know where the exits are, the entrances, the shortcuts. They may not know people in their communities, okay? So it's paramount. Have a good contact list of details of emergency services. Where's your local police station? Where's your local fire station? Where's your local shelter? You have no idea how many times I go into community meetings and say, please tell me where your nearest shelter is. No one knows where they are. The education's there. They're published all over the internet, social media, but people just take it for granted and don't check on these things. So shelter locations, make sure you know where one is to your local home, if relevant in your territorial jurisdiction. Know the vulnerable people of your community. Okay, there was one vulnerable community in Cayman susceptible to flooding. A lot of elderly local residents residing there, and due to the knowledge of the community, were able to identify who these people were before the police could show, before the fire service could show. We're going into the community, evacuating these people, helping the community, bringing them to shelters, hospital, etc. So know the vulnerable persons in your community. Take the time to get to know your community better. Okay, goes with evacuation routes. Could be that a bridge is cut off. The main road into town has got a tree across it. There could be another route that you're not familiar with, okay? Start thinking about different routes home. Might be beneficial for traffic purposes, especially in Cayman. I can speak to that. There is more than one way to skin a cat, as they say. But evacuation routes, make sure you know where you're going and where to avoid if it's low-lying. Similar to power line locations, if there's substations that have a lot of power line overheads, very worthwhile to avoid these areas. Do not get out of your vehicle if you're driving, if you see down power lines. Could be there's electrical current there and you don't want to experience that. One thing right now, filling up on gas. As we know, some parts of the region, there's a shortage on gas and diesel. Speaking for everyone, cost of living, prices of fuel has gone through the roof in Cayman. I know it has in Bermuda and I know it has in Turks and Caicos. But all the same, don't panic buy fuel if you don't need it. Hurricane Ivan here 18 years ago in September, there were people sitting in traffic for nearly 4 hours trying to fill up their vehicles with fuel, and they still had enough fuel in their car to all along. So please only get it if you need it. And one of the most important things, depending on which media source you're checking into, is make sure you wait for the area to be declared safe before entering and exiting, okay? Just because the storm has finished and you look outside, there's no rain, don't go out and take a wander around the local community unless you are told it is safe. There could be a hurricane cordon in place by the police that you're unfamiliar with, or you don't know has been declared or deemed finished or finalised. So make sure that you hear those things before you go out wandering around and driving around into certain parts of your communities. And I think that is it. Very short and sweet, to the point, but I think most of us get the idea of what I'm trying to say. It doesn't matter what time of year it is. Make sure you get yourselves prepared, get yourself a good family plan, and make sure you're not rushing to the supermarkets last minute to panic buy these items, because as we know, they're not going to be available.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for that, Eddie. Real quick, where can persons get, let's say, for example, an example of a family plan so that they can create their own? Are there resources on the Red Cross's website?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to be honest, if you went to Google and put in, family plan, hurricane awareness, there'd be a whole list of credible sources. Red Cross would be there, the Federation website. I'm sure a lot of government entities, the disaster offices for each region would have that on there. But they don't have to be in too much depth. I think when people think of a plan, they get a little bit anxious and say, oh, don't have the time to put it together. But it'd be very simple, just basic information, cell numbers, contact numbers of people, where people live. And obviously, if you've got young kids and you're fortunate to live in a big home, areas to avoid, not to go out of the front door, those sorts of things, and make sure you're practicing those things as well. You don't want to write it all down, put it in your cupboard, and then not look at it for 10 years. These are things that we want to be articulating ourselves, get it in muscle memory, so people know exactly what they're doing.
Okay, awesome. Christian, any questions for Eddie?
No questions. Very great presentation. Just from a governmental level, is that we noticed that Cayman Islands has its own Cayman Islands regiment, and Turks and Caicos now has its own regiment, because one of the things at one point Bermuda was the only overseas territory that had a regiment, and generally what used to happen is once a hurricane hit anywhere in the overseas territories, the Bermuda regiment was sent to assist in disaster recovery, I guess you would say. But now it's good to see that each island, not every island, but more islands are now having their own disaster recovery elements, I guess you would say. So and what that does is that builds that network that, let's say, so God forbid something happens to Bermuda, Cayman Islands could possibly send some assistance to us. They actually have 2 helicopters, which are no other OTA. So we know that climate change is real. Climate change is not reversing. And we know that we are going to have category 3+ hurricanes. So it's just a matter of not if, but when and where. So thank you, Eddie. And we hope to have you back hopefully under peaceful circumstances.
Anytime. I'll be back whenever you want me. Pleasure to be here.
All right.
Thanks for coming.
Cheers, Gov.
So we just have one tip or a comment that came from our viewers, and mentioning that we should also remember that our businesses need to have an emergency plan, so that employees know what should happen in the event of a disaster. So that's also a good tip to add to all that he just presented. So that was great. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think we lost our other guest. Let me add her real quick. Oh, she is. Okay. All right, Chris. So again, let us real quick before we change gears, remember our sponsors. Let me bring them up. Our media partners, sorry. And they are ZJB Radio in Montserrat. We have CBN Radio 90.9 FM, one of our stations here in the Virgin Islands. Saba Radio 93.9 FM. Last year was their 50th anniversary, so we're still wishing him that. Turks and Caicos Radio, Channel 82 in Bermuda, Radio Turks and Caicos, CMR, Cayman Marl Road Facebook page, in addition to our own Facebook page, Territories Talk, or the YouTube channel. And our newest media partner is CBC, Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation. That's Channel 8 in Barbados. So again, thanks to all our media partners. And I think we have all the British OTs covered. We have one more to pull in. And again, anyone viewing that wishes to have this aired in their jurisdiction, feel free to reach out to us. Just send a message on Facebook and we will contact you. All right. Back over to you, Chris.
Yes, and now thank you once again to Eddie. Now we are talking about some other, let's say, unnatural hurricanes, I would say. And I would let Mr. Ron A. Grant of 284 Media over to you, Ron, and then Miss Wendy.
Well, thank you so much, and good evening to the beautiful people of the region. As mentioned, my name is Ron Grant of 284 Media in Tortola, the British Virgin Islands. Guys, we've had a number of incidents, activities, a lot on the political scene taking shape across the region. I had a conversation recently with one of my friends from California, and they noticed that we were quite busy with content. And I said to them, as busy as we are, I would not have wanted to be anywhere else in the world at this time but at home, because essentially I see where, while some would say you have a Caribbean in a catastrophe, it is some of the most historic moments in history. So let's start with the Virgin Islands, of course, where I was born and raised and where I reside with my family. The Commission of Inquiry and the recommendations, the 40 plus recommendations that have come forward, and then also to the unfortunate events that have led to the arrest and detention of our former premier and one of our officials for the Port Authority. Now, in having conversations with our regional partners from Turks and Caicos, as well as Montserrat, one of the things that I've been hearing as it pertains to the COI, and I don't think that many persons across the region are paying attention to it, is that the events of the Commission of Inquiry, the events that have taken place in Montserrat since 80, 89 to 92, and then in the Turks and Caicos later on, and other OTs as well, are not isolated incidents. If we look at the trajectory of history and the developments of how the UK has ruled in its effort, we cannot separate them. Now, while in our case, the events of our former premier, some would question whether it's a coincidence, some would question whether it was, the orchestrated. We cannot separate the events on a regional level, because if you look at it, it strategically aims at particularly one thing, and that is, in a nutshell, forcing OTs and the citizens of OTs to somehow feel that their local people are incompetent of service, their local people are not worthy of leading. Okay, so when we look at the COI, we look at the events of the honorable former premier, that is, sorry, you have to question, what are we doing wrong? And one of the reasons I say, what are we doing wrong, is because when you segue to such high level leadership, now let me just interject and say, no Caribbean leader, no leader in general, no political party, no government is subject to not having some level of high scrutiny in all aspects. But when we segue to Caribbean leadership, a great example would be Mia Motley. Okay, and the reason I say that is because recently, as we all know, she was named one of the Time magazine's 100 most influential people. And I think holistically, one of the reasons that is, and why that took place, is that Mia Motley, PM Mia Motley, did not, while her island might be small, she didn't think small. And I think a lot of our leaders are not necessarily connecting the dots on an international level. When you can holistically attack issues such as climate change that are strategic in how your country would turn out, and you could develop that and you could articulate that very passionately on a national level, I think that's where we need to be heading to. Sometimes, in my opinion, in interaction with local leaders and speaking to many of them across the region, we see where their vision is essentially tunnel vision. 25 square miles, for example, take the BVI for example, and we somehow feel as though that we are just 25 square miles. Segueing back to the Commission of Inquiry, one of the things that many of the persons who participated in that investigation sometimes fail to realize is that the entire world was watching. And if we consider those ramifications of our actions when we know that there is a microscope on us, I think that we would act differently. Speaking of a Caribbean in somewhat of a catastrophe at this time, I want to segue to the St. Kitts and Nevis. Of course, we know that they have had, like you mentioned earlier, that they dissolved the House. Of course, a political war where a unity government is now no longer a unity government, and we see a struggle for leadership. We now in the Virgin Islands, just bringing comparison, have now formed a unity government. Two members of the opposition have joined the government. Two cabinet members have now stepped back and are now backbenchers. They have surrendered their ministries and swapped essentially. We see where the unity government concept, in many cases, and I think if we're honest with ourselves, many persons may think that it is the step in the right direction in the initial stages. But like in St. Kitts and Nevis, we see where when the final analysis comes and there is a separation of power, there is a leadership opportunity, we see where that structure very quickly falls. And that is what we're seeing in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. Of course, with Dr. Timothy Harris, the Honorable Timothy Harris, and the Deputy Premier, Sean Richards, as well as Mr. Brantley of the CCM over in Nevis. So you have essentially three political parties, three or four, that are now battling for that leadership. Now, speaking on the whole matter of election and the fight for power, essentially, and fighting for power, I just want to interject, it's not a negative thing. I think we have a lot of competent people across the region, and if they see fit, if they do deem it necessary, if they see the opportunity arising for them to be in a position to serve, nothing is wrong with that. What I think we need to look holistically at is our approach and its ramifications on our territories, and also when we look abroad, what is the message that we're sending to the rest of the world? So take, for example, before the Commission of Inquiry, we were essentially preparing for election in the BVI. Now, that may still be possible, okay? We have a time frame up until early next year. We have Antigua, we have Grenada having a by-election, we have St. Kitts and Nevis, we have Anguilla, and of course, just across the waters, the U.S. Virgin Islands, they are, of course, having their general election on November 8th. So across the region, and we did know ahead of time that this was going to be a heavy election year for many of our neighboring partners, but we see where a lot of different strategies are coming into play. A lot of different methods are coming to play. Some are playing out, I think, in their best interest, and some perhaps, as some would say, are not. But we have to continue to look at them closely, and we have to continue to look at our behavior on the political stage and the campaign trail as leaders. Again, what message are we sending to the general public? One of the things, guys, that I wanted to also touch on a regional perspective, as we looked at how the region is taking form, we cannot negate, we cannot forget COVID and the reaction and response to COVID. A lot of us are, I think, moving towards some sense of normalcy across the region. Protocols are being relaxed, mandates are being relaxed, but we have to look at our numbers. And when I say numbers, take, for example, the numbers in the Virgin Islands as it pertains to tourism at this point have significantly dropped. Now, there are a lot of factors that we could consider that would attribute to that. But what role are we doing essentially to play and making sure that our various industries, because COVID came like a wind, as we know, and really shifted the trajectory of events. But with all that we've been through, how are we now learning from our mistakes? I don't think that we are, in many cases, learning from what we're seeing on an international stage. Now, some would say we could not prepare for this. This was something unexpected. But again, I don't think we have to reinvent the wheel. So looking at COVID mandates and responses and the healthcare aspects, we have to understand and ask ourselves, what essentially are we dealing with, and how are we behaving and responding to some aspects? Now, with that in mind, one of the things that I want to bring to our forefront that I think we sometimes forget is culture. I think it's tremendously important when you look at the region. Culturally, what are our practices that might work for us and against us? I want to segue back to the Commission of Inquiry. In many cases, if you scan through the 40 recommendations and the 900 plus pages that were presented to the government and the people of the Virgin Islands in regards to the Commission of Inquiry, one would question and one would simply ask, is it culture or is it corruption? Now, that does not negate from some of the practices not being the most sought out, not being the most guided and documented. But when you look at a country and countries on a whole that have survived and made it their business to impart practices that they feel would be to the betterment of the people of the Virgin Islands or whatever territory in spreading the wealth, you have to question whether it is culture, again, or corruption. And I think as
Ron,
yes, go ahead.
just hold that thought, because I think we're on the cusp of a very interesting debate. I want to let Ms. Wendy come in and speak for a few minutes, and then we'll get back into the debate of culture versus the other C word that they love to say.
Indeed.
Hi there, guys. Sorry, I'm technically challenged, as you can see. No, it's very interesting listening to Ron, actually, because when he said about it was a historic moment and he couldn't think of being anywhere else but the BVI when what happened last month. Interestingly, it's more than a decade ago now, but an old journalist friend of mine left the Cayman Islands because he said it was boring. And this was around about 2008. And literally, it must have been the next 3 weeks later, our entire police management was suspended from office on the basis of a corruption investigation. I don't know if any of you remember that, but back in, it went on for a long time, Operation Tempora, which was looking into corruption within the Royal Cayman Islands Police Service. And it is important, if you're a journalist, to be in a place. And just because for a minute or two, you know, it might be just all Pirates Week and, you know, hoop-de-doop down at the beach. But things happen in this part of the world in lightning speed sometimes, and it's really interesting, and it's up to us to be there to document it and to make sure that people understand what's happening to them. And it is interesting what's happening at BVI, whether it's a coincidence, as you say, or not, I don't know. I think one of the problems and the challenges that you're going to be facing now is how, you must come together as a political force, so that the various oppositions and previous government party must come together to work out how you're going to deal with the situation with Britain, because obviously, you know, we're all wrestling with that problem of being a colony basically still, and at the same time wanting our own political rights, okay, you know, our way forward. One of the things I think that we've suffered from over the last few years with our governments, although we're relatively stable, is this idea of unity. Everybody always wants politicians to be having a big old love-in and sitting around and sharing, but all that happens is massive compromises are made and you don't move forward. And I think, you know, we're struggling with the same issue right now with our government and dealing with climate change. Climate change is very much at the forefront of the news in the Cayman Islands at the moment in time, like from development, the issues of development, the fact that should we or shouldn't we get crews back or all the rest of it. But climate change is massive. And we have a very, very clear division because we have a coalition government that's made up of independents. The Premier is one of the foremost climate warriors in the region, you know, not unlike Mia. He is all about it. He's laid it out there. He'll do whatever he can to preserve the environment, but he's got a cabinet of people that disagree with him. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the problem. And that compromise of when you're wrestling with really important issues and you're all sitting around a table and you have that collective responsibility and you can't agree the way forward, then it just stalls. I'm all about, you know, voting for. It might mean that not everybody's going to be with you, but it means that you're going to put your policies forward. You're going to roll out what you want to do. And that's, I think, one of the issues that BVI is going to face now is like, you know, is it time for you guys to talk about independence? Because the thing is, there isn't time. You're in the same boat as us. You've not got time to deal with this for now. You too are also dealing with the same problems that we are about climate change. But anyway, that's my 10 cents worth.
Thank you for that, Wendy. Is there what are some of the pressing issues that's going on in Cayman Islands at present?
as I would say, it's climate change, and then some more climate change. We're wrestling with getting everybody involved in shaping a new climate change policy, but we still have the challenges of dealing with beachfront development, which is it's not just the fact that it's pushing all of us out from access from the beach. Some of the most beautiful beaches in the world, none of us can see them because they're just covered with $1 million condos. On top of that, it's pushing up house prices beyond belief. We have grave concerns about who owns these buildings. A lot of them are owned by offshore entities. We don't really know who the real owners are of these condos. It's all sorts of requests are made of planning, and swimming pools and patios and everything get built in the sea virtually, and it all seems to be okay. And it's that kind of stuff that we're all now really, really worried about. We know, and as we all know, it's hurricane season today, and we got the next 6 months. We can only hope, but there's a lot of talk about the fact that we could see a monster of all storms this season, and which one of our islands will it hit? I don't know. But those are definitely some of the main issues that we're dealing with. And food insecurity as well, which is a major problem for Cayman, because we can't afford to farm on our land because the land is so expensive that who can afford to buy land to farm on it?
How is the cost of living in Cayman Islands?
Oh, you don't even want to know. We just gone through $7 CI for a gallon of gas. That's like $8.5 US, yeah.
And what about rents? What are the rents like in Cayman Islands?
Ridiculous. I mean, it's like you can't CI $1,200 for a studio if you're lucky. A studio apartment, family homes $4,000-5,000 a month. Buying a home is prohibited. I mean, it's impossible. Impossible. First time starter buyer homes. No, you're looking at well over $250,000 US. Well over.
Because one of the interesting things is that most of the overseas territories have been told, "Oh, you all should be like Cayman Islands. Be like Cayman Islands. They are the model of success."
Well, whose success? If you've got more than 50, I mean, bearing in mind, yes, there's a whole heap of rich people here, and they're doing fine, thank you very much. But the vast majority of people on these islands are earning, I mean, our minimum wage is 6 CI an hour. Mm-hmm. And the vast majority of people earn, even like regular folks, like not even low income folks, people, teachers, nurses, sort of blue collar and white collar workers don't earn that much. Everyone's less than $5,000 a month, and that doesn't translate to the kind of prices that we're seeing and the issues that we have to face. We have huge duty on everything. I'm sure you guys are the same, actually, from that perspective, as like all islands, overconsumption and all that. But our cost of living is through the roof, and it is challenging. It's beautiful, and that there are many things that you think, well, it's worth it, but it's getting harder and harder. I find it increasingly difficult. I must admit, I worry a lot about what retirement means, and I think that's what we're seeing right now, is that our pensioners, people who are on fixed income, worked all their lives for government or whatever, and they're drawing a small pension. This is impossible, the cost of living for them.
So how are people feeling towards the PAC government at present?
It's mixed, I think. There are a likable bunch of guys, I think, and girls. I think everybody thinks they're a lot less corrupt than previous administrations. Certainly the Premier. The Premier is well liked, and certainly clean hands and all that. But there are issues of the fact that there's a clear divide in the cabinet, really. You can see, sort of factions emerging, and the fact that not everybody is on the same page about everything. And that's what happens when you have this love-in. It's all well and good voting for independence, but what does that mean when it comes down to policy? At the end of the day, governments are supposed to say what the policy is, and it's very difficult to roll out policies when you can't get agreement in the cabinet.
Mm-hmm. And what's the any questions from you, Ron? You're the professional journalist, sir.
Well, Wendy, I want to thank you so much for a lot of what you shared. One of the things I want to ask you, though, with all that's been going on in Cayman, what are the residents themselves doing? What's the dialogue like? Because I find many times in some of our Caribbean countries, residents may feel uncomfortable. They may not be fully supportive of incidents, but we become enablers. And by that, what I mean is that we simply become silent. And I wanted to know, what is it like on the ground as it pertains to citizens and their dialogue? What's the conversation like as it pertains to all of this stuff, cost of living? How are they speaking up at all?
We have a significant number of armchair warriors using social media, but to actually get people on the streets is extremely difficult. Mm-hmm. And to get people to stand, but social media to a certain extent has put people in a position where they are more likely to expose who they are, because they don't have as much choice if they're posting. Our website was famous because when we started in 2008, we were the first not social media then, but website that allowed anonymous comments, because we had a lot of issues relating to government workers who weren't allowed to comment, and so we decided that we would do it, and it shocked and horrified people, but they got used to it. But now on social media, what the problem is in Cayman is that people are just not yet ready to really hit the streets, and I think right now the PACT government it's only just done its first year. People have been very generous in giving them space, but I think the cost of living and the climate change issues are getting to a point where I'm not so sure that that it'll be confined to just the social media keyboard warriors.
Understood.
It's interesting, Chris. Every week or every episode, I would say, we always hear those echoes where sometimes we think it's only our struggle, but we realize, the same thing is happening across a region in maybe a different shape and form.
Yeah, I think, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, if you're fortunate enough to meet persons from each island, it's the same thing. It is literally cost of living, lack of opportunities for locals as far as housing. It's the same issues. The dollar value made is a variable, but it's the same issue. And one of the things that as persons in different islands, before social media, we didn't get a chance to speak with each other. You might have saw a news clip here and there, which is a very, tainted, whichever way the journalists want to taint it. And so you get a snippet of what's going on in an island, and you don't really get the full picture. But now with social media, WhatsApp, Instagram, all this sort of thing, we have a little bit more composite picture of what's going on each island. And it's like, oh, you guys are going through the same thing as us. Oh.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, man.
And I want to thank you for your work. I've been following CNS for quite some time, because that was one of the few ways I was able to get news from Cayman Islands. So I just want to thank you for all the work that you've done, Ms. Ledger.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And I'm really sorry, guys, but I have to depart early. I'll definitely be on the show again, and it's great to meet you. And I agree with what Thomas said about how important it is now for us as small island nations, as well as being overseas territories, to get together more and to find some common ground about how we deal with the particular challenges that we have as colonies and territories and frontliners on the climate change issue. But I'm going, but I'll be back soon. Thanks
Definitely.
a lot.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So, Brother Ron, let's get into that debate.
Talk to me.
What was the term? Did you coin this phrase? Did you patent
culture,
it? Culture versus corruption?
Yes.
Yeah. Why are we so quick, not only on the international scene, but why are some locals themselves who have benefited from a culture and a way of doing things, not saying that all of those way of doing things are the best, but why are we so quick to coin what we've been doing for decades as corruption? For example, one of the matters that came about in the Commission of Inquiry is where there was a particular project that was broken up into a number of petty contracts, as we would call it, right?
You mean 70 pieces?
Not quite 70, but it was I think it was about 40. Yeah, but it was a lot, right?
It was a
Um,
lot.
it was quite a bit. So you have one project and you split it up into 40 plus or so, right?
Mhm.
In our defense, and this is a mechanism that has been going on even before my time, before I was a child. I am proud to say that I'm an '89 baby, so I'm a young journalist. I'm a 32-year-old professional, but a lot of these systems have been in place before my time, where you have a project and instead of giving Sheena or Thomas the entire Chris the entire project, you want to split it up because you want to give somebody an opportunity to eat. That is how our economies essentially have been run for a number of years, and essentially spreading the wealth. That's an example of how, particularly in our COI, and it might be debated, and that's okay, where culture, a way of doing things, has been easily coined as corruption. Is the system flawed? Um, Perhaps are we doing a poor job at documenting the way we do things as a BVI people and as territories? For example, if these are cultural things that we have been practicing and been doing, why is it not documented? Why
Mhm.
hasn't it been documented so that the procedures and policies are in place and there's some reasoning behind it? That's
Yeah.
that's one of the examples I would pose.
Yeah. And I had this conversation, I believe it was last week, explaining about, the process, or I guess the way of we've been doing things in terms of in the public services says itself, and the intent that was behind a lot of what was being done. And as I think it was a legal friend of mine, when he defined corruption as, not following the rules. And I think one of the issues we have here, from my experience in the public service, as well as, what I've been reading in the COI report, is that it touches on what you just said. Some of these processes are not documented, or they've evolved over time, but the best practices have not kept pace. So the question of whether or not was the project split up into multiple contracts to avoid the public tender process, it's something that you can't necessarily prove, because some of the processes aren't, it's not documented to say that you shouldn't do this or you can't do this. It's going to be speculative at this juncture. If you have an issue where the project is broken up, persons maybe who are not qualified to do the work, or they didn't finish the work, that's a whole different issue in terms of actual the project management or the contract administration side of it. And I am actually doing a show to start to go through the details of the recommendations, and I'm interested to see what happens there, because we have these things in the financial instructions, we have these things laid out in the Public Financial Management Act and the regulations in terms of how contracts should be done. So the question of how certain things have been allowed to happen or have been continuing, is going to be interesting to see how changes are made. That for me is going to be interesting to see, Ron, because like you
Absolutely.
mentioned, these things have been happening for a while. Granted, the auditors again would bring them up in terms of saying, what is best practice as it relates to making sure we get back money for the taxpayer's dollar. But we need to see how exactly do we correct what we perceive to be the problem, and not have social fallout. Because as you said, in a
Hmm.
small economy as ours, the intent that I know and understand was always there is that you are trying to give opportunity to as many people as possible. Now, we don't want to go into the minutia of, one
I
person
wanna
blocks
I want
another.
to bring one example to the forefront, Shayna, if I can, in
Go
the
ahead.
essence of time. Recently, as you may be aware, the district allocation that our representatives uh, have long been given. The amounts have varied over time, but in this recent case, the premier of the Virgin Islands and cabinet have decided that the district allocations will now go through the social development department. Now let's break this down for a second, okay? First of all, the social development department, as small as our territory is already overextended. but I want to pinpoint the cultural aspect and the social ramifications that a decision like that would have. Whereas persons may say representatives have the authority and they know how to give assistance to who they want of any amount. You're now essentially taking away the right of the district representative and the people, that culture of communication and dialogue and direct contact. We had an issue where even with the stimulus package, you had many persons who refused to apply for pride and for other reasons. Now you have an instance where residents, voting members of the electorate, no longer can plead a case to a representative and say, okay, perhaps a child is going away to school, perhaps they're starting up a business, perhaps, and let it be said,
Situation.
and let it be said though, let it be said honestly that for decades, a lot of the finances as it pertains to that may have been mismanaged. Okay. For example, culturally, and this is a very perhaps a cynical example, but it's facts. Somebody billing a cistern, and they're going to government officials and asking for help. No, you're billing a cistern, you're billing a cistern. There's no need for you to ask somebody, a government official, for assistance. That is a responsibility on a citizen.
Individual.
You know, correct? Okay, so there we see where culturally we have enabled certain behaviors.
Yeah.
But moreover, when you go to that and you make these sort of very stringent changes, automatically you're shifting the nuances of a country and the interaction between citizens and their elected officials. You're now essentially putting elected officials and bringing them down to simple policy makers, which is nothing's wrong with being a policy maker, but you're belittling their abilities to manage and to help the people, but you're also taking away citizens' right to easily and accessibly go to their elected officials and plead their case. Culture.
Yeah.
Let me interject if possible. What I find interesting, again through social media. If we went back 50 years ago, we could easily been painted a picture that the way that things are done in the Caribbean, whichever island is culturally not right. It might be culturally right, but process-wise is incorrect. And that doing things the English way is the only way. What COVID and the response to COVID has proven in England is that even in England or the United Kingdom, let me be clear, they didn't follow processes. They didn't follow procedures. The UK government under Boris Johnson has had to write off $5 billion in useless PPE because they just gave contracts without due diligence, without vetting proper manufacturing standards. The list goes on. The point being is that how can they now come to the Caribbean? They're going to start with Virgin Islands and work their way through all the overseas territories.
Absolutely.
How can they now come to the Caribbean and tell us that, oh, you didn't follow the procedures, mate? Really? When did we give away $5 billion worth of stuff? We never had it, right? To your point, Ron, where there's balance. In Bermuda, MPs are not given constituency allowances, right? If someone needs social assistance, they have to go to the financial assistance thing, and then there are qualified social workers, case workers who vet whether this person really is in need and what they should get. So there is some balance, and it does take away the autonomy of the elected official. But what it does also, it's a safeguard where that elected official could never be accused of handling public money. So absolutely. I think that what's going to have to happen in the VI, beautiful Virgin Islands, is that there's going to have to be some level of middle ground, because
Yeah.
there could be, how can I say, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you. So in that to say, just because our culture dictates that this is how it should be done or how we have always done it,
Mhm.
does not mean that we can't modify to um, nullify the next generation of leadership being accused of corruption, right?
Yeah.
And that will essentially take a shift in mindset, a
Yeah.
shift in thought process for the people of this territory in order to understand the way forward.
Yeah. And that's going to be key with all the changes that are coming, because
Absolutely.
I think that's probably where a lot of anxiety is, even starting with that first announcement. I was saying to somebody, you definitely won't be seeing any new applications going in, but there has to be a transition period where persons who are currently receiving any kind of assistance, they have to be vetted and pass through the criteria to see whether or not it was a legitimate case. And if so, they continue with the new system that goes into place. So I just hope that from the government's standpoint, that it's not going to be a flip of a switch, but that there's going to be a time of public education and explaining, this is what is going to happen, this is how it's going to happen. But one of the things I thought about, though, Ron, in terms of the new role, I would say now that the members of parliament will have to take on, is really to be more, as it were, representative, because you know how it goes sometimes. Just trying to navigate the most simple of processes in the public service can be daunting. So it's going to be something where they will definitely have to be advocating, as it were. And I mean, all of that could be part of the process where, as the district rep, you might know more personally, what a person's situation is. And it's a good to give opportunity to say, this is why I would recommend or refer this person to a particular service to be able to continue to get assistance, or they need assistance for a particular situation. But I would like to see, though, that the districts still get back their allocation, because initially those allocations started off for the district offices and small projects.
Mm-hmm.
And then it completely morphed into something else because another part of the system wasn't working. So it goes back now where we have to make sure that whatever new is put in place, that is actually improved, it's more efficient, more effective in getting the job done. And that people are going to get the assistance that they need, because that is something we cannot shy away from. People tend to look at people and think that they're doing well, but not all of us are. So it's very important to have it. But it's going to be a shifting ground for a few months, if not years, well, coming out of the COI.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, Chris.
Well,
What
yeah,
else?
some other points you.
So I know we went over time. Just letting everybody know we're gonna go up until 9, because we wanted to make sure that we get all our points in terms of the scope of the news roundup. I think you guys had touched on St. Kitts. Ron, you did a couple interviews with some of the former cabinet members. What
Yes.
was your take on that, and what's going to happen, you think, coming up in the election?
So I had the opportunity to sit down with the former deputy prime minister of St. Kitts and Nevis, the Honorable Sean Richards. I would say to the general public that the aim is to cover and interact with a number of the other members. For example, I've been in conversations with some new members of the Labour Party and other parties, and some senior members of the Labour Party as well. But holistically, what you got from that interview is a change of heart. Definitely, one of the things that he mentioned is that initial conversations and promises that were made upon the initial forming of that unity government were not upheld by the present prime minister, and so you had a case where members felt as though they weren't being valued, essentially, and as a result, they parted ways and they separated. Of course, the prime minister, in his negotiations and way of doing things quickly fired the defiant members, for lack of a better word, and dissolved the House. And now you have a case where you are going to more than likely have another coalition government. And it would be very difficult and interesting to see how that is formed, because the unity government itself that was created initially is no longer. The candidates and the members that would have normally formed would not are no longer in alignment. So you're still going to have a coalition government, but how is that going to come about with who's there, who may be elected? How are you going to join forces? So that's one of the things that we're looking at closely over in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. You have a number of new candidates coming to the forefront, but it is going to be an interesting road for them, and to see how they are able to come to that. Of course, conversations not only with the former deputy prime minister, but with some legal experts over there. Many persons are wondering, is it time for the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis to have a prime minister that is from Nevis versus St. Kitts? Is it premature? Is it still possible? And that is still left to be determined. You still have a lot of persons who are saying no. One island is seemingly more dominant than the other, and others are saying it is possible. If we're all one, we should be able to pick a leader from St. Kitts
jurisdiction. Yeah,
correct. Yes,
that's true, because then they choose a premier over Nevis, and the prime minister is from St. Kitts.
Correct.
Yeah,
but in any Westminster system, which every island has a variation, it's whomever commands the majority of the support in the House. So in St. Kitts, Mr. Grant, I'm taking a leap of faith and saying by your surname alone, you have some linkage to St. Kitts and Nevis?
Yes, that is not an assumption. My mother is a Kittitian. My eldest brother is older brother is a Kittitian, and my father is a Nevisian. Yes.
Okay. All right.
And
so we're family.
I'm a proud Virgin Islander.
All right. So we're double family.
Okay.
So in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, they have 11 seats, 3 seats in Nevis, and in the federal government, there are 3 seats in Nevis and 8 seats in St. Christopher or St. Kitts. All right. Let's say hypothetically somebody wins 3 seats in Nevis, and the majority of 11 is 6, right? So and then he has a coalition with, or she has a coalition with someone in St. Kitts and says, you know what, the 6 of us are going to support you as prime minister. It's a wrap, right? I mean, that's the Westminster system. I may have missed something in their constitution. I don't know. But what I see in St. Kitts and Nevis is that, as you would know, the coalition government came out of the fact that the PAM party, People's Action Movement, did not have enough seats to form government.
Correct.
Right? The Honorable Tim Harris and some other Sam Kondo a few years back had a motion of no confidence against the then Prime Minister Denzel Douglas. So that the St. Kitts and Nevis Labour Party were basically dominant for 20 years.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what we see now, or what we saw up until a month ago, was that there was a coalition government that was formed basically just to break the domination of the St. Kitts and Nevis government. So there's going to be those who would say, well, you see, what done bad in the morning can come good in the evening, right? But this is politics. This is democracy, and it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, I'm watching what the Nevis Reformation Party is saying under the lady, Dr. I forgot her name, Daniels
Hodge,
and I'm actually liking her. So it's interesting to see how this is going to play out.
So when is the elections?
They have not actually declared elections, if I'm correct. They have not
Oh,
actually announced, and I may stand corrected, but the election process it's they're hitting the ground, and at the time, of course, it was they had 90 days to do so.
okay.
If a date has been set, I stand corrected.
Okay. Because I know I hadn't heard anything, so that's what I was asking as well. Compared to
Yeah.
Grenada, they're gonna have elections this month.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So Chris, what's
What's
the
your thoughts on
backstory
Grenada,
to
Mr. Grant?
I honestly have been reaching out to a number of the leaders, and if I'm correct, it's a by-election that they're having, correct?
No, in Grenada's a general election.
A general election. Okay. So I'm not too privy on the situation in Grenada, but I have been reaching out to a number of the members to get a better understanding. And that's yet to happen.
All right. So in Grenada, they're having a general election on the 23rd of
Of
June, basically 3 weeks away. And you have the incumbent party, the NNMP, which is run by incumbent Prime Minister Honorable Dr. Keith Mitchell, who have every seat. They control every seat. For the last 3 elections, they've controlled every seat in Grenada. Then you have the NDC, which is now under leadership under Mr. I might be pronouncing it wrong, Deacon Mitchell. I'm not sure if they're related, but he is a young corporate lawyer, and there has been some, from what I've seen, if you use the Caribbean barometer of how many people go to whose rallies, the NDC has had a large turnout at the rallies. Now, I don't know what the polls are saying, left, right, and center. Incumbent governments don't normally call elections 1 year early unless the polls are saying something favorable to them.
Okay.
So we're watching that to see how that also plays out. It's interesting time for politics, I would say, in the region, because
Absolutely.
Just earlier this year we had Barbados elections. That was our early election at the turn of the new year, and that was a 30-seat sweep, second time around. And here it is, we have a lot of movement again throughout the region, and we're still just in the first half of the year.
What's your thoughts on the upcoming election in the USVI?
So I've had the opportunity to speak with independent candidates, Kurt VLA, and Janelle Saru, who are both sitting senators. They have teamed up thus far, of course, to offset the Brian Entregenza administration. The aim, of course, is to speak with others as well. But it's going to be interesting to see how that turns out in the U.S. Virgin Islands. I think it is definitely quite early to call. You have on one end where that team, the Saru or Vele and Saru team, persons are adamant that they are really good senators and they have created a voice in the House, and persons are a bit seemingly worried. Just up today, I had a conversation with a couple from the U.S. Virgin Islands who appeared to be worried that you won't have that level of representation in the House, whereas some are saying, well, the Brian administration, the Brian Tregenza administration, it's their first term, and they feel as though perhaps they need more time to execute. So it's going to be, I think, we fail to realize sometimes how important the youth and the liberals play in elections. And I think in this case, where you have a more seasoned set of politicians like the Brian and Tregenza administration, and then the VLA and Saru, who are very strong education advocates and have been in the Senate for some time and voiced their opinion, you may see a switch where it's a decision between the liberals and what's to come, and the idea that what I'm seeing in a senator, and that strong representation is what I want in a leader. Persons are saying that VLA, who's been the head of the finance committee for some time, knows the numbers. He knows how to get the financing. He knows how to get the federal funding, which many are saying that under this present administration has been available, but not, for some reason, it has been unable to be accessed, or it's extremely slow. So I think we have much to watch over in the U.S. Virgin Islands as it pertains to how it's going to turn out.
Yeah.
So just for my edification, those who are running as independents now, were they previously part of the Democratic machinery?
They're sitting senators, yes.
No, I'm saying they were elected as independents, or they were elected as Democratic?
I'm not sure of that. Yeah, I can't verify that.
Okay. All right. Where else? And then, of course, okay. Shout out to our media partners, ZJB Radio in Montserrat, CBC TV in Barbados, our newest media partner, CBN Radio, our original media partner, Saba Radio, Channel 82 in Bermuda, Radio Turks and Caicos, and Cayman, Marl, and Cayman Islands. Thank you.
So just to interject, my sources are just messaging me, and they're confirming that VLA was previously a member of the
Democrat. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So and then we also have the inevitable election that's going to be happening in Antigua.
Yes.
What's your thoughts on that, Mr. Grant?
I believe that, again, we're going to see there's a possible shift. We have a lot of our leaders who have been there for quite some time. They're seasoned professionals. Persons like expertise, they like experience, but many are wanting change. And I think when we compare where we are as a region and where some residents essentially want to see their country go, the question would be, do I want to stick with what's there? Some say, if it's not broke, don't fix it. But one of the conversations that I've been having with a colleague over in Antigua is essentially, he's saying, I realize that it might be too late for me, but I want better for my children. And what's been happening or what's been taking shape doesn't necessarily show to me that that's possible. So again, when it comes to politics and elections, we really don't know how it's going to turn out. But I think it weighs heavily on the mindset of the people and what space they might be in, but more so where they envision a future for, if not themselves, their children.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any thoughts, Shaina?
Well, I was just gonna say we could stay and talk all night, but
Yes,
we gotta start a wind up, and I think this is a good place in terms of sticking a pin, because there'll be many more things for us to come back and actually look at the outcome of it. But definitely what I think one of the things that has been playing in my mind is in terms of, how well has the political machinery been working for the people, and whether or not term limits are something that will help to stave off some of these issues that we see. Because if persons go into office with a different motivation, that you need to get things done within, let's say we have 3 terms, that you stay focused on that versus focusing on getting reelected as many times as possible. And because, like, for example, the situation with Grenada, Antigua, a lot of these are long-standing politicians that have been there for, probably 10, 20 years, and there's no infusion of young energy and new ideas that have come along the way and may have moved the development of the countries much further along in those cases. So it's going to be something for us to pick up another time, Chris, in terms of looking at that and having Ron and possibly some others from throughout the region for us to start to look at, whether it's the Westminster system or any other system. I think it's time for a renaissance when it comes to our politics, because we have a lot of major issues on all of our agendas, national agendas, that need to be addressed. And you need your best minds at those tables making the best possible decisions.
Brother Ron, anything you want to wrap up with?
I want to first of all thank you guys for the opportunity and the conversation and lending my voice to it. Rarely do I get to speak on how I actually feel, so this opportunity to be
welcome home, brother. Welcome home.
take the hat off and really share. But one of the things I would like to leave with the general public is that sometimes when we look at Caribbean brothers and sisters in our region, we kind of like to separate ourselves sometimes, and there is no need for that. That is why I love Territory Talks so much, because if we understand nothing, we must understand that we are all connected. Our decisions, our successes, our failures are all intertwined, and they all affect each other. So if we could keep that at the forefront of our minds, not only as leaders, but as citizens, then yeah, we might be in a better place to move forward.
Definitely.
So,
yeah, I echo that, because, as I said, you've been doing some great work with 284 Media in reaching out and giving exposure to persons, not just politicians, obviously, but persons from other parts of our region. And one of the things that in each of our island groupings, we become very insular and think, well, our island is all about our island, and forget the other 700 islands. I'm exaggerating there, right? But persons who live outside of our region see us all as one, right? But we don't see ourselves as one. And one of the missions of this show is to give voice to everyone. And as we all know, the smaller islands have not really had a fair voice in regional media. So we are going to create our own catwalk, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, definitely.
most definitely, yeah.
All right, Ron. Well, thank you for being here again. We're so happy that we did eventually get to have this conversation tonight, and I hope that our viewers tonight, as well as those that will come on later, get a lot of takeaways from what's happening around us regionally, and they will stay tuned in to see, the outcomes of whatever that's going on. So we will be back here, I believe, on the 22nd of June.
Yes.
Again, we're not sure what the topic is for the next episode, but we're always open to suggestions, so you guys can send us messages on Facebook, or
maybe get somebody from Grenada.
Maybe. Actually, yeah, that would be the election week. I'm here checking my calendar.
It'll be the day before the election.
Yeah, it'll be the day before. So we'll see how we bring the news on that, or maybe even after. But it's definitely something for us, again, as a Caribbean people. Echoing what my brothers just said, it's all about unity, because that's where the strength and the power is for us as a people. And we only will come to that place by learning and, seeking understanding about one another. So on that note, I bid everyone good night, and let us continue to unite and inform our overseas territory family. Good night.
Right.